How Slavery Defined Race and Culture in America, Episode 3, Political Representation. In 1870, after Reconstruction, Joseph Rainey of South Carolina was elected the first black member of Congress. Since the election of the first black member of Congress, there have been several freedom movements in the black community. You have the Harlem Renaissance, the Black Panther Party, the Million Man March, and Black Lives Matter.
Introducing Daphne Martin, an attorney in the Washington, D.C. area and a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and business owner. Hello, Daphne.
Hello.
The first question I have for you is what are the limitations of black political representation?
I think the limitations on black political participation involve lack of access, socioeconomic barriers, as well as education about the process, and just a stigma that the process and the system doesn't work for us. And just to kind of expand on that, obviously, as a group of people that emerged from slavery, then to be disenfranchised from the political process, from capitalism, basically to face barriers in so many aspects of our lives. I think that, in our communities, sometimes we don't, have the best resources for education, which is something that helps people to learn about social studies, history, how things work in the political process. Then you have, a lack of access to resources. So, we built wealth for this nation, but we don't necessarily, become born into it or just have access to it passed down from generation to generation collectively. So I feel like, that in and of itself is a barrier. I think there's a fear behind kind of putting yourself out there and risking your limited standing in the community already, because what will people think if you stand up and you fight for change. How will your family feel? Because the political process and government is messy, and not only to and understand that I'm speaking about like running for office, not just the voting process. I think that there's this feeling that you are risking financial assets, time is a resource. So most of us are hardworking people, so you may need to take time off from work to really engage in running for office, or even just being a part of a grassroots movement to affect change. Now, with that being said, I think all of those limits also impact voter participation as well, because there's that feeling that year after year, election after election, we go out, and some of us do vote and nothing changes. At least that's, the feeling that I think a lot of black people have. Our schools aren't improving, and, there's a ton of reasons that could be the case. But I think that collectively, those are things that impact our feeling about the process and impact that access that we feel like we have.
How do the black freedom movement encourage participation and impact limitations?
I think that black freedom movements are empowering, to say the least. I think that the right people, the right leaders, make people feel like they can. Obviously, to use a more recent example, in 2008, when Obama announced, or I shouldn't say when he announced, in 2008 when he was running for president, and prior to that, I definitely think you had like this hesitation, right? Because it's connected to that fear that I talked about earlier, like, this country's never going to elect, a black person. But I think his message was very simple. I think it was engaging, and I think it empowered people to feel like, you know what? maybe we can actually do this. Maybe we can get behind this person to affect change. And I definitely think that if you look at his campaign, it was very grassroots, right? Like, this is not a person that's coming from big money or that has, you know, all the backings of, you know, tons of corporations. And I think that sent a really good message to a lot of people, because it was like, okay, yes, he was a lawyer. You know, yes, he went to Ivy League schools, but this was not that person. Like, this was more of a self-made person, like a truly self-made person who, you know, pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and is presented before us to, you know, run for president. And then, of course, you know, you have different organizations, you know, everything from, you know, one of the oldest organizations, the NAACP, the Council for Negro Women. There's so many organizations that we have, of course, including Delta Sigma Theta, that are out there being involved in the community, including the rest of your Black Greek organizations, you know, local organizations. I feel like the way that they push past the limitations is that a lot of people that are involved in those organizations, they're your neighbors. They're the people that you grew up with. So it shows you what is possible, right? So it shows you like, oh, you know, I can, you know, start a business, right? Everybody doesn't necessarily need to go to college, but it shows you that people that you know in your everyday life can break past those barriers and those boundaries. And hopefully, if they're a part of those organizations, they're reaching back to show you that it can be done. And so I think there's power in numbers as well. So if we're all working together, you know, to do voter registration drives, or, you know, there are organizations that will actually host seminars and trainings on how to run for office. And so when you have those Black freedom movements that help people to educate them, to show that, you know, there are things that are possible, even if, you know, you don't come from money, or, you know, come from a family that, you know, came over on the Mayflower, right? That you can actually get involved in the process. And we also know that, you know, it was empowering, you know, to see Barack Obama elected. Like, we, you know, Black people felt like they accomplished something. And it's not that things are not happening at, you know, the local level, but I think that was something that, even though it, you know, he didn't run for president as just simply a Black freedom movement, or, you know, simply as I'm going to be the Black president, I think his political campaign was still a movement to get Black people engaged and to make them feel like they could affect change. At the local level, I think it's very important for us to be involved, because those are the things that I think most immediately impact our schools, jobs, you know, local taxes and things of that nature. And so I do think a lot of times people forget. So I'm going to use the example last week. Here in Bowie, Maryland, we had elections for mayor and city council. And so I had, you know, posted about it on social media, and there were so many people that were like, oh my gosh, do we have local elections, right? Like, they hadn't even bothered to really look or to be engaged, right? Because they may not be as publicized in the media, right? Like, you may not see articles on the Washington Post that, oh yes, there's going to be, you know, this election, or it may not be as blaring as some of your national elections. And so I think it's important that we not let media be the only way that we find out, you know, those type of things, because it's just as important. How can those Black freedom movements limit or impact limits on political participation for Black people? I feel like there is in the Black community a concept of respectability politics, and, you know, I'm not a fan of it, but it is something that is there. And it's one of those things where because we have been oppressed and we have been judged for how we look and how we speak and how we talk, there's this feeling that there's only a certain type of Black person that, you know, can run for office, or you have to be respectable in a certain way. You got to look a certain way, you got to speak a certain way, present a certain way, right? And so sometimes I do think that there can be a pretentiousness in certain organizations, in certain movements, that do make people feel like they can't be a part of the process. There are times where, when it comes to, you know, just voter engagement or voter turnout, you know, we get caught up in these debates and judgment of people that don't feel like the process is for them. And I myself, I don't spend a lot of time arguing with people about that, because I understand how they can feel that way. I think that the better thing to do, instead of judging or trying to force people to feel like they have to, you know, turn out, is to find out what other things they are interested in about the process. Like, I actually have a friend that's like, I don't care about national elections, but they're like, I turn out for every local election. And of course, you know, I have other friends that judge her for that. So I think we have to move away from focusing on that, because what I also happen to know about her is that she's also very involved in her community in giving back and making sure that young people do at least understand what the process is, whether or not, you know, she chooses to participate in it. And so, yeah, I think sometimes, you know, certain movements, you know, can just make people feel like they're iced out, as opposed to being as inclusive.
Thank you very much for your time. Have a good evening.